Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Government plans to overhaul the laws governing how the state, police and spies can access communications and other forms of data head back to the Commons this afternoon. The Investigatory Powers Bill is the last big piece of legislation before the EU referendum. The bill, championed by the Home Secretary Theresa May, aims to give new powers to the police and security services, particularly around the bulk collection of people's personal data. It also wants to give the system more oversight by setting up a commission made up of senior judges. One of these judges will have the power to approve or decline warrants for the most intrusive investigations, like hacking someone's computer. The privacy safeguards in the bill were boosted earlier this year after it was criticised by 3 committees of MPs. After the changes, the authorities will only be able to access people's internet records when it's necessary and proportionate for specific investigations. One of the most controversial aspects is a clause that requires phone and internet companies to keep a record of the websites visited by every citizen for 12 months, which could then be viewed by the security services. The Shadow Home Secretary, Andy Burnham, set out 6 areas of concern on behalf of Labour, but the party then abstained on the bill when it was last in the Commons. And last week, a report by the Joint Committee on Human Rights, chaired by Labour's Harriet Harman, said the new powers would not be inherently incompatible with privacy rights as long as certain safeguards were met. Well, we did ask the Home Office if a minister was available. None was. But we are joined by Shadow Home Office Minister Keir Starmer. Welcome to the Daily Politics. So the last time this bill was in the Commons, Labour abstained. What are you going to do this time?
Well, we've been really clear from the start that a new law is needed to update the powers, but also because after the Snowden revelations, it's very important that the powers that are being exercised are on the face of a statute with proper safeguards. But it's got to be the right bill. So we have consistently made demands of the government to improve the safeguards. And we've been working over the last month, 2 months in the Bill Committee to achieve those safeguards. Now, in fairness to the government, they've met our demands in a number of key concerns. So there is now going to be an independent review of the bulk powers, the very wide powers, carried out by David Anderson QC. This was very important demand on our part, and the Home Secretary has conceded on that. And that's a very positive thing on her part.
So does that mean Labour will now support this bill?
There are still 6 outstanding issues where we have made...
Well, there were 6 before, so when you say there's been movement...
One of them split into 2, but they're basically the same issues that we've been clear on. Now, and they include, for example, that trade unions who engage in legitimate trade union activity should not be spied on for that reason. And the government have indicated that they're with us in principle on that. How they go about this afternoon in the debate will be critical. And on internet connection records, we've been clear that there must also be a seriousness of offence before there must be access. So we've had a consistent set of demands, and we also want an overarching privacy clause so that every time a decision is made under the bill, under the Act as it will be, privacy is seen as a key consideration.
Right,
now,
but do you consider this bulk use of data or surveillance as an intrusion into one's privacy?
Yes, it is an intrusion into privacy. The question is whether it can be justified. Privacy is a right, it's a really important right, but it's not an absolute right.
Right, exactly.
It's not an absolute right. The question is any invasion necessary and is it proportionate? Now, on that key question, is it necessary? That's the reason we've been demanding an independent review, so that David Anderson can look at the operational case for bulk powers and take a view on whether those powers are there and they're needed.
But the bulk powers have always been there to a certain extent, haven't they?
Some of them have, the vast majority of them have, but this is the first time Parliament has had the chance to actually look at them, because until now, before Snowden, we didn't know anything about these powers, or the general public didn't. So this is an important moment, because post-Snowden, we have to decide, do we put them on the statute book with safeguards, or do we go under the old regime, which is vague powers without safeguards? and I think we need to look forward.
Keir, one thing I would say, and I agree, I would prefer to see something codified. I think there's too much of a confusion of lots of different bits of legislation that potentially can apply. But I also think we should not be naive about this. The truth of the matter is that this is going to need constant updating. The idea that you can sort of future-proof a bill and not come back to this for 10 or 15 years, I don't think that would be
but
correct.
do you agree
That's why the overarching privacy clause is. That's why we've been arguing so hard that the Home Secretary must give on this an overarching privacy clause. So, however things change in the future, privacy is always a key consideration. And that's fundamental.
Do you accept that the government has been dragged to this point a little bit? I mean, when it started out, and we've been doing interviews about this bill for quite some time, that actually a lot of what they were asking really was more than just an invasion, intrusion in privacy. In some cases, it would be counted as almost, illegal by international standards.
I think, in fairness, I was on the Intelligence and Security Committee in the last Parliament, so we were aware of some of what was then disclosed. A lot of what was disclosed by Snowden. And I think that was a real scene setter and changer. And in part because actually global communication service providers, the Googles of this world, they, of course, essentially had a reasonably cosy relationship with governments and security services across the world, and they now demand global protocols. And that, I think, is one of the things that is going to emerge here. And the one concern I have is just around encryption, because I think that the government has talked about the idea of trying to weaken cryptography. I think that's going to be very, very difficult to do, because, again, I think there will be global demands about the way in which this will have to operate.
Are you happy at the moment with the way the balance is between the security services?
I think Keir makes some really, really important points. There are people out there, and every conversation about this has to start in recognition, there are people out there who wish us ill, and it's right that the state can, in effect, snoop. The question is, who oversees the people overseeing this? I've tabled an amendment suggesting that there should be a parliamentary confirmation hearing so that the Commissioner is approved by Parliament. If the government's willing to accept that, I will vote for the legislation.
You will?
If they won't, I won't.
Right. What do you say to that? Is that a good idea?
Well, I think the oversight is critically important. I mean, I've seen this from both sides of the argument. I spent 20 years as a human rights lawyer taking on cases for people who had their human rights invaded. I then spent 5 years as the Director of Public Prosecution working with the Security and Intelligence Service. We do need these powers, but there must be the right safeguards. Oversight by judicial commissioners is very important.
Will you support my amendment?
Well,
I'll support yours if you support mine.
I've been working on the amendment
I'll bring the full body of the
deals with the
parliamentary
Prime Minister's involvement in that, because I think there's a need for an independence of appointment. So, in principle, yes. In fact, the amendment I put down is a different one.
Yes.
But how they're appointed is critically important. This is a real chance to get it right, but the government has to. The ball is in their court now.
Keir, do you not think also we're going to need a cadre of experienced judges in this area? This is a very specialist.
Why are there not?
Area.
Are you saying there are?
I mustn't make this the elite establishment stitch up. Come on. This is
we're getting back to that referendum argument again.
This is why the country's in the
would
state
you
it's
trust
in.
the Home Secretary to do it then, alone?
If they're accountable to Parliament, and if the people's tribunes can hold them to account, if Parliament has a confirmation hearing and can say no to one of these
You'd say
grandees,
no judges.
Then, no, I like the idea of having judges, but I think the House of Commons should have the ultimate ability to say no.
Right. I mean,
we
the thing
do have
is,
the
does it
judges.
have to be cursory, though? Because one of the complaints was that a judge oversight, there are so many of these requests that actually how much time is going to be given by the person who has
This is a very
oversight?
important issue. We have been pressing hard. I've said it's got to be close scrutiny, not light touch scrutiny. The judges have got to see the material that's before the Secretary of State or the Foreign Secretary, and they've got to exercise close scrutiny. They've got to grapple with the substance, not just the process.
What's the seriousness of
that's one of our
offence, by the
demands
way?
for this afternoon. So watch the debate, because...
And you won't support it without that?
We have been clear what our demands are. It's really for the government now. They know where we stand on this. If they're going to move to a closer scrutiny, more substance than process, then that will be a very significant move.
What I would say, the government are taking this pretty seriously, very unusually.
So they will give in to these things?
They will give in, certainly. I mean, very unusually, you've got the Home Secretary herself is going to be there on the floor of the House, as opposed to a junior minister. And I think that's a reflection of how important they look upon these issues.
Just very briefly, you said about the seriousness of the offence. What counts in your mind as serious enough to warrant that sort of inception?
Well, usually we measure seriousness by the length of prison sentence, whether it be 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. On this occasion, we need to be more subtle, because a lot of groups that are concerned about stalking and harassment are anxious that the power should be there in cases that concern them. So it's a subtle exercise getting seriousness right. The point we're making is if you're going to use internet connection records, you've got to be clear it's not content. You've also got to be clear that it's for a serious enough case to actually use them, not just any case. And that, again, this is to be debated.
This must never be
in the
used to
course
get
of this.
people for relatively minor offences.
Exactly.
That's
Which was
the
the
danger.
complaint about some local
The danger
authorities
is that
using it.
HMRC will start using it for people not paying their taxes and that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Low-level offences ought to be out.
Right. Well, that obviously will have to be clear then in the wording as well.
Well,
Keir
lot
Starmer
to
said-
discuss this afternoon and tomorrow.
I've been getting away with it all